Everybody that knows me knows I love to throw a swim jig, so that's what we started out with this morning. Black and blue 5/16, trying to get a feel for the lake. It's got a lot of overhanging stuff in the water. A swim jig's a very versatile bait. You can fish it around every type cover there is, flooded bushes, grass, rocks, docks. I have a swim jig tied on 365 days out of the year. Well, I'm trying to get the feel for this new lake. I haven't made 4 or 5 casts with that, and that's the first one. So we're just gonna run around and try to get a feel for it. You know, try to get a feel for color, you know, what kind of mood they're in. You know, paying attention to every bite. It's like putting a puzzle together. Pay attention to every single bite you get, because they're all pieces of the puzzle. Spring, summer, winter, fall. It's just a very versatile bait. I feel like it excels so well because it's a very natural, subtle presentation. You know, there's not a lot of vibration, there's not a lot of flash. We get so much pressure that something that's very subtle and very natural, I feel like gets you a lot of bites. I feel like my color's wrong though. Maybe not. That was cool. Yeah, this bite was in exactly the same way as the first bite was. I was shaking that jig, and this fish came from way up out of the bushes. So that's another deal with the swim jig. You have the ability with a swim jig where, you know, necessarily you wouldn't have that with a crankbait or something like that. You can skip this jig way back in under that overhanging cover and get bites that a lot of guys are gonna miss. But it's so weedless that you can pretty much throw it anywhere you want. You can almost just close your eyes and throw it. And there's like a 99.9% chance that you're gonna get it back through there without getting it hung up. It also gives me the ability when I pull up to a isolated piece of cover or a lay down, still gives me that option to be able to flip it like a traditional flipping jig. You know, I can swim it along through here in these grass and drop it into dark holes. You know, like I said, if I see an isolated piece of cover out here, you can just let it sink down and fish it like a traditional jig. So it's very versatile, gives you a couple options, but the biggest thing for me is it gives you the ability to cover a lot of water and break things down really, really quick. And that's what we're trying to do this morning. We're just trying to figure out how to get a bite and what kind of mood these fish are in. Because that was like 2 or 3 bites right there that they're just nipping it. I don't have the right color. We're gonna have to make an adjustment. When those fish obviously commit to it 100%, you know you got the exact right color, the exact right trailer. But when they're coming up there and acting really funny, you know, either chasing it and not touching it, or maybe coming up there and nipping the tail, to me, I always feel like there's 1 or 2 things that are wrong. Either you have the wrong trailer or you have the wrong color. Day in and day out, there's basically 3 colors you can get away with. You can have something black and blue, something green pumpkin, and something white. You can take those 3 colors anywhere in the country and have really good success swim jig fishing. So we're just gonna go in here and try to find a color that we feel is might work here, you know, something brim colored, bluegill. And I don't like a lot of bright colors when I'm, you know, trying to match a sunfish. I like little subtle, like you can see this got a little orange and a little blue in it, but it's not overpowering. So we're probably gonna go try something like this, try to match some bluegill. This is my signature series swim jig from Lure Parts Online. It's a swim jig that I've had near and dear to my heart for a long time. This is actually a 5/16 ounce in size. I throw a 1/4 ounce a lot. This jig is available in 3 sizes: 1/4, 5/16, and 3/8. You know, I'm the guy that kind of likes to float that jig and flutter it and keep it around the strike zone as long as I possibly can. That's why I like that 1/4 ounce so much. When I want to scoot it a little faster or maybe cover a lot more water, I'll go with a 5/16. If I want to fish that swim jig, let's say down on a grass line or maybe down on the end of some lay down trees or something, that's when I'm gonna reach for a 3/8. It's got a 4/0 Gamakatsu in there. Some guys like a 5/0 hook in their swim jigs. It's available with a 5/0 as well. I just prefer the 4/0. Weed guard I feel like is perfect right out of the package. So we're gonna go with something with a green pumpkin. If we can't get them to commit to that, then we're gonna start playing with trailers, okay? Trailers to me are probably the most important thing. As you can see, I got a kicky crawl type trailer on here right now. If I feel like this isn't the right trailer, my next step's gonna be maybe going to something that has a lot more action or something that has a lot less action. You know, another thing I like when I'm throwing this swim jig is I like a trailer that has what I call some resistance to it. And what I mean by that is when I'm winding that jig through the water, it almost feels like it's pulling back on me. It has some resistance. And a lot of times you can achieve that by any type crawl trailer, but some crawl trailers don't have a lot of resistance to them. What that does for me is it lets me float that jig a lot slower. You know, you hear me talking about floating that jig around the cover all the time, and by having that crawl trailer on there that has a lot of resistance to it, lets me achieve that really, really easy. But what that other thing that it does, it has a lot of, when it's got that resistance, it has a lot of water displacement. And even like you see, that's a small compact jig. With that big trailer that has a lot of resistance, it has a, to the fish, it makes, I think it makes it feel to the fish like it's a bigger profile than it really is. Lets them key in on it a lot better. Boy, that bait has a lot of resistance to it. All right. Like I said before, when you get the combination right, they choke it. They don't miss it. There you go. Sat down, made a little change, a little color change to something bluegill. I had 3 or 4 come track up behind that black and blue and never commit to it. That was like my second cast, and as you can see, definitely a good one. That one got it. I'm a little different when it comes to my presentation on a swim jig than a lot of guys are. I think immediately when we think about power fishing, we think about fishing as fast as we can, you know, chunking and winding. And I'm kind of different with my swim jig. You know, my favorite size is a 1/4 ounce because I want to try to keep that swim jig in the strike zone as long as I possibly can. You can watch when I make a cast up there, I'm just kind of shaking that rod tip real slow, kind of actually letting the rod do the work. Yeah, I'm throwing it on a high-speed reel, but I want to try to keep that swim jig in the strike zone as long as possible, where a lot of guys are really scootering it and really shaking it, just fishing really, really fast. I just have always felt like the longer I can keep this jig by floating it, or what I call hovering it, around the strike zone, I feel like the better opportunity I have to be able to draw that fish out of there and get a bite from him. You know, there's days when they want it extremely fast, but for me, day in and day out, 1/4, 5/16 are the head sizes I'm gonna reach for. You know what I mean? I feel like fish get accustomed to the same presentation day in and day out. And when you can take the same bait, you know, I mean, you take a swim jig that everybody's using and fish it in a little different manner, slow it down, keep it around that strike zone as long as you possibly can, gives them a different look. And like I said, for me, that's my confidence and that's the way I like to fish it. Boy, he's a skinny one, but you can see he's got it choked. That's the beauty of a swim jig. Don't be afraid to get up here and as shallow as possible, man. All a bass needs is enough water to get over his back. And the swim jig fits the bill perfect for this type presentation. I mean, you can see how shallow it is. And there's a lot of baits you couldn't throw up there and fish like that. You know, we're just running down the bank, throwing a swim jig, covering a lot of water, keeping that trolling motor just rocking. But as you can see, I got my live turned on and I got my 360. You know, my 360, I always have it running regardless of what I'm doing, because there's so many times during the day that I'll see an isolated piece of cover on my 360, whether it be a pile of rocks or an isolated stump, where I can just simply make a pitch out there and catch a fish that I necessarily may not have caught, simply by just leaving your electronics and every once in a while glancing down. If you look at the screen right now, I can see balls of bait fish on there. You see that right there? Balls of bait. Actually looks like there's a really good fish sitting right there on the edge of the bait. So always pay attention to that, because that may be the key right there to tell us, instead of running down the bank, beating the bank, that we need to be out there. But yeah, as you can see, like, we would have never known that was there. It's cool to see that. Like I said, I think a lot of guys pull up to a piece of cover like this and make 3, 4, 5 pitches to the piece of cover and roll on to the next one. I've always been that guy that when I get on a good piece of cover, when the water depth will allow me, I love to put them raptors down and pick apart on a piece of cover. You know, you're always going to hear me say, if I think there's 10 fish in that piece of cover, I at least want to catch 9 of them. So just remember that when you're in a key area, put those shallow water anchors down and make repetitive cast to everything that's available right there in front of you. My preferred rod size when I'm swimming a jig is a 7-foot 6-inch rod. I want a rod that has a lot of backbone but has a soft tip to allow me to roll cast that jig, as you're watching me do right now. But what that soft tip does, it gives you the ability to shake that jig without necessarily shaking your hand. As you can see, I can get that jig, or that rod tip, shaking really fast. That's by having that little bit of softer tip. You can see that right there, but the rod still has a lot of backbone. Like I said, I prefer a 7/6 rod because for me, a lot of your swim jig bites are really fast and really violent. The other key to that is having a high-speed reel, you know, a 7-to-1 or an 8-to-1, because like I said, those fish the bites are so fast typically that a lot of times those fish will get you out of position. And I feel like by having that longer rod, when those fish get me out of position, I got a lot more rod to be able to move that line. Always swimming my swim jig on either 30 or 40 pound Seaguar Tactex braid, which is a camouflage 4-strand braid. I know a lot of guys like to swim on 50 and 65, but I feel like when I got my jig on a braid that's that heavy, I always feel like it's on a jump rope, because I've always been that guy that I feel like the lighter my line, the more action I can get out of my jig. But don't go so light that you're gonna hurt yourself. We got the combination right, because you can see they're definitely choking it. Whereas before they were swatting at it, now they're getting it. Probably one of the biggest questions I get asked is, why do you throw braid over fluorocarbon? You know, as you're watching us go down through here, we're making a lot of little short roll casts, a lot of skip going on, and it's easier to skip with braid than it is with fluoro. But the biggest thing for me is, once again, you're always throwing around some type of cover, whether that be grass, flooded bushes, overhanging trees. And I feel like if you're throwing it on fluorocarbon and they get you out of position, you do not get a very good hook set. So by going with braid, it gives you a better hookup. And once you get fish in that stuff, there's a really good chance that you're gonna get them out. The only time that I would stray from throwing braid is if I'm in an open water situation where maybe I'm fishing a swim jig around where there's blueback herring or something like that, where I don't necessarily need a weed guard on my jig and I'm not throwing it around any type of cover, you know, open water points and places like that. Maybe the only time that I fish fluorocarbon, but typically for me, 95% of the time, I'm always going with braid. You know, it's cool to watch and see that, you know, them fish were missing that black and blue one, and we made that little bit of change, and now they're choking it.